Mr. Brown, I am pleased to say this episode is a little different than most because we actually saw each other in real life just about a week ago. Here's proof, photographic proof of that. Um, it was really great to see you. Thanks for the ability to get together.
Well, you're welcome to come over to our house and eat our food anytime, Jamie.
Well, I like to think of it as a high level strategic meeting where we discussed the past year and the coming year and what kind of episodes we would cover. And actually, we did get into a topic that we're going to cover right now tonight because as we were discussing, Mosaic has opened up a business opportunity for every flight school, every CFI, every DPE. Your potential audience of clients just got much bigger because the Mosaic Rule passed. Uh, and basically, what I'm talking about in the flight school realm is the limiting factor, Pat, for years since light sport was introduced in 2005, I believe.
Yeah, right around there. Yeah.
Most flight schools didn't have an airplane on the line that met the standard. And while I don't mean to be abusive to anyone, Piper introduced the light sport, didn't really work out well. Uh, Cessna had one that I hate to say this, but it was a truly horrible airplane. It was awful. But now that is not the case. If you've got 150s, 152s, Cherokee 140s, 161s, whatever on the line, odds are very good you could appeal to a whole new clientele, bring in new money. Do you believe this is valid, or do you think I'm, well, pardon the expression, but whistling Dixie?
Well, no, Jamie. Actually, um, I think it's a tremendous opportunity. Let's go back and kind of define Mosaic, though, for if you've been under a rock for the last couple of years. Basically, Mosaic. There's a lot to it, but in terms of what we're talking about here, basically it redefines the qualifications for lights. Well, the airplanes that sport pilots can fly. The qualifications to be a sport pilot haven't changed, but the airplanes that they can fly have. And so what it basically means is that if you have an aircraft with a clean stall speed, calibrated airspeed of 59 knots or less, that airplane now can be flown by a sport pilot. It may or may not be classified as a light sport aircraft. That's another question entirely. But if you're flying any kind of an aircraft that a single engine aircraft that has a calibrated airspeed, clean stall speed of 59 knots or less, that it can now be flown by a sport pilot. So as you say, that opens up a huge opportunity for flight schools that didn't have airplanes that would qualify for that, because Cessna 172s, Cessna 182s, several of them, Archers, Warriors, possibly some Arrows. Again, it's all predicated on the stall speed.
And I think the selling point from a flight school perspective is getting proficient at flying and getting a certificate so you can fly solo or with a passenger just got cheaper because there are certain tasks you don't have to do for a sport pilot that you do have to do for a private pilot. And I should say, the tasks in common, the completion standards are the same. It is not a
Yes.
dumbed down certificate. Give me an example, Pat, of some of the things that I don't have to do to be a sport pilot, which would lower my training costs.
Well, there's no night requirements. Of course, obviously, you can't fly at night. Now, there's a caveat to that, but for our purpose of our conversation right now, you can't fly at night. So there's no night requirement, and no instrument flying. You can't do as a sport pilot anyway. Even with additional training, you can't fly instruments as a sport pilot. And there's the cross country time, training time, and distances are somewhat reduced. So those are really kind of the three main things: reduced cross country time, no nighttime requirements, and no instrument time. Now, that said, if you receive additional training at the private pilot level for night flight and you want to go and get a medical, if you've had a medical at some point, you may qualify for basic med, but at the very least, you'll have to have a third class medical if you've never had one before. And a private pilot level training for night flight, you can even fly at night as a sport pilot. But as far as the training goes to get the sport pilot certificate, no night, no instrument, and reduced cross country training, and solo requirements.
So if I'm a potential flight student and I show up at the flight school and I say, gee, I've been thinking about this for years and maybe it's time to do it now. How do I become a private pilot? That's one list of requirements, which does include a minimum of 40 hours training, and you're going to have to get a medical. But all of a sudden, that same array of airplanes out on the flight line that my flight school has, and I'm a CFI, I can go ahead and instruct sport pilots just as easily. I'm allowed to do that. But now I can say, now your minimum is 20 hours of training. You don't need to get a medical, and we can go out and look at these airplanes. Little different material to study, but basically the same thing. It allows us to reduce cost, which from a flight school's perspective is good. Yay! I've got more
Yeah,
people who could afford to do this. I'm wondering now if with this Mosaic change, and I believe this might be true, the sport pilot is now the smart entry level way for the casual pilot, not the person who wants to definitely be a commercial pilot for a living. But if you want to fly for fun, that might be the way to go because Pat, I generally fly alone or with one other person. It's very
right.
rare for me to fly with two or three other people.
Yeah, with the cost of a private pilot certificate, hovering and this is a broad. I'm painting with a broad brush here, Jamie, because it depends on where you are, the kind of equipment you're flying. Can depend on a lot of things. But with the cost of a private pilot certificate hovering somewhere probably between $12 and $18,000. Again, that's a pretty broad range, but you're going to be in a ballpark almost no matter where you go. 12 to $18,000 or so. Um, and the average time to get a private pilot certificate kind of hovering around the mid 60s, maybe to low 70s in terms of hours. Again, 40 hours required, but in practicality, it's going to be somewhere between 60 and 70. I mean, and I see that every day when I'm doing private pilot certificates. Private pilot check rides, they're all 99% of them are more than 60 hours, and some of them border 100. But anyway, I digress. The sport pilot requirement is 20 hours. So I think I think that I don't know that you could cut your time in half or the cost in half, but I do think it's certainly feasible that you could cut it by a third, perhaps more, in terms of the overall cost of getting your sport pilot certificate. And with the proper training, there's very little. Honestly, there's very little that you can do with a private pilot certificate that you can't do with a sport pilot certificate. You can fly from coast to coast with a sport pilot certificate, and to your heart's content. There's no
I was going to
restriction on
say,
distance.
I could load my long suffering spouse into the airplane and fly from my house in Florida to your house in Texas as a sport pilot, no problem. And I
Yeah.
could do it in the same plane I used to use as a private or a commercial air pilot. It really does open a lot of doors. This is a much bigger change, I think, than many of us have realized because of the fact that all these opportunities now exist. Even people who just didn't want to go through the hassle of getting the medical. Well, you don't have to now. When you go to that flight school, the CFI can go ahead and sign you up for your student pilot certificate. That's
Yeah, well, they've always been able to do that.
well,
Well, I
for
say
several
always. I
years.
mean,
Used to be your examiner or medical examiner. Then it was the CFI. But I mean, it's not three or four different stops anymore.
correct.
It's
Yeah, it's a
go
one-stop.
one place, talk to one school, and you're off and running. And for that relatively small group of people who maybe want to buy an airplane to learn to fly, and they're going to fly that later, all of a sudden the number of airplanes you're allowed to fly in as a sport pilot got huge, which means you're not looking at new constructed airplanes. You might be buying something 50 years old, well maintained. As I often say, Pat, as a student, you're looking for something ugly and slow and inexpensive, but airworthy.
Yeah, because you're really talking about building time and not distance. so to speak. But back to things that you can do as a sport pilot. We talked about flying coast to coast, for example, and you can absolutely do that if you intend to land in a class Charlie airport or a class Delta airport or flying class Bravo. You do have to have endorsements to allow you to do that, which is not the case with a private pilot certificate.
Mhm.
But once again, with the appropriate endorsements, the appropriate training, you can do almost anything with a sport pilot certificate that you could do with a private pilot certificate. A four-place airplane, only two people, yourself and a passenger, but it's still a four-place airplane, not a six-place airplane with two seats taken out. I mean, a for real four-place airplane. And one of the questions that I have gotten frequently over the years, and I suspect I'm going to be getting more now, is that, hey, I'm a CFI, and somebody just asked me to teach them to fly sport. What training do I have to be able to teach them? Do I have to take another check ride? Is that what? No, it's not. You're good to go. Pick up the PTS because, oh yes, the sport pilot is still a PTS. Now it was updated, and I think the date you'll see on it is November of 2024, and it went into effect May 31st of of 2024, but it's still a PTS. So if you're looking for an ACS for sport pilot, it doesn't exist. But all you got to do is take a look at that. And Jamie, as we talked about, the performance standards, the plus or minus 100 feet, 10 knots, 10 degrees, all of that stuff, short, soft field takeoffs and landings, normal takeoffs and landings, steep turns, stalls, slow flight, all that stuff, the parameters are the same. And it's the same check ride.
And maybe one of the hidden values is if I choose to go become a sport pilot and I'm flying with a CFI and I get my sport pilot, but then a year later say, man, I wish I could fly at night, or I'd like to add an instrument rating and I need a private to do that. I don't have to start from zero. I just have to train on the private things that didn't get covered in the sport pilot training. And
Yes.
now I can go take another check ride and become a private pilot. So
Yeah.
it's really an incremental step. It's not a whole different thing.
Yeah, but there again, there's a caveat to that too. The devil is always
Isn't
in the
there always
detail.
though?
There always is. So if let's say I come to you, Jamie, you're a CFI airplane. Not
Mhm.
limited to sport pilot only, CFI airplane. And I start down the sport pilot path, and I think, man, this is greater than I even thought it could be. I think I want to just go ahead and go for my private because you are a CFI airplane, not limited to sport pilot privileges. All those hours count, and we can just change paths and off we go this way. However, Jamie, if you are a CFIS or for CFI sport pilot, and I come to you, Jamie, I want my sport pilot certificate, and we're halfway through it. Man, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'm going to change paths and go the private way. Unfortunately, those hours don't count
Correct.
unless you continue through, take your sport pilot check ride, become a sport pilot, and then decide to add on. Now all those hours do count. It's just the way the regs are written. Like it or not, I think it's not great, but it's what we have to live with right now. And there are some interpretations out there that bear out what I'm saying. So you can be skeptical about it all you want, but if you do the research, you'll find out. I don't mean you specifically, Jamie, but if somebody's skeptical about what I'm saying, just do the research, and you'll find that what I'm saying is the case.
No, I'll back you up. That is true. There is a difference between a CFI and a flight instructor with a sport pilot rating.
Correct.
And that is critical to know. So when you go visit your flight school and ask if you can do this, be sure to ask that flight instructor, are you a CFI or are you a flight instructor with a sport pilot rating? Because it does matter. But for the flight school owners, for the CFIs, even for the DPEs, because you're a DPE, giving the check ride for a sport pilot, it's not a huge hurdle. That's not that tough to do. Am I correct?
Yeah. Now, for an examiner, what some folks, I'm sure most people who aren't an examiners don't realize that, there are certain things that um, we're authorized to do. And it's basically all of these things are annotated in our letter of authorization. So we might be authorized to do private pilot, instrument, commercial, multi-engine, maybe seaplane. We can issue ground instructor certificates. We can issue foreign pilot equivalencies. We can issue drone certificates if we have those appropriate authorities on our LOA. Sport pilot requires an SP. So if you're a DPE and you don't have SP after that, you can't do sport pilot check rides. And if you want to be able to do a sport pilot CFI initial, so let's say a private pilot comes to you, Jamie, as a CFI, and says, "Hey, I'm a private pilot, but I love to teach, and I want to get my sport pilot flight instructor certificate." Well, that person can do that as a private pilot with no instrument rating, no commercial certificate. They can come to you, and you can train them to be a CFI for sport pilot. It is a regular CFI check ride. There's very little difference.
Mm-hmm.
But your off the street examiner can't do that initial, even if he or she has the authority to do a CFI airplane initial check ride. That doesn't extend to sport pilot. Again, I don't know why, but it doesn't. And so you're going to have an SPFIE addition to your letter of authorization if you want to be able to issue initial CFI sport pilot certificates. So the DPE has to have SP in order to examine a sport pilot and SP-FIE in order to do a CFI initial for sport pilots. So for us, it's really kind of just a paperwork exercise, but you've got to get the FSDO on board because the FSDO is the one that has to process that paperwork. And, I was lucky because it didn't take very long to get that done. I asked for the SP several years ago and got that right away. And it took a little bit of doing to get the FIE just because our FSDO was busy when I asked them for it. But it's really largely just a paperwork exercise.
Well, as you said a couple minutes ago, there's always a caveat. I
Yeah.
mean, no matter what we're doing. But I think the big point to this, the summarization of it, whether I'm a prospective flight student who wants to learn to fly, whether I'm a CFI who's trying to build time and make a couple bucks, if I'm a flight school owner and want to expand the market, or I'm a DPE and I want to be able to give a few more check rides, whole new world of opportunities open up just because of Mosaic. So take
Yeah.
advantage of it. Read up on the rules. As Pat says, go get the practical test standard for sport pilot and study that. But Pat, I'm kind of excited that it's very rare that you can make the announcement that achieving the goal you want to do just got cheaper. And it really did.
Yeah, it did. And anybody who's watching who wants a little bit more, if you really want to get into the weeds a little bit, the FAA has an order. It's called 8000.95D as in Delta. So 8000.95D as in Delta. If you look at it's a huge document, but you can look it up online. If you look at volume 3, chapter 2 and chapter 5, chapter 2 and chapter 5, very good. I see you know your numbers.
I
Uh,
do. I've
good.
been all the way through third grade, just like
Oh,
Jethro
excellent.
Bodine.
Excellent. Excellent. Chapter 2 and chapter 5 and volume 3 of 8095 Delta, 8095 Delta. That will kind of explain how to become a DPE, but it also, if you go down a little bit further, it will talk about getting the SP or the SPFIE added to any examiners that might be watching this today. So again, it's mostly just a paperwork exercise, and you have to go into DMS. If you're an examiner, you have to go into DMS and actually ask for that authority, and then just deal with the FSDO. So.
Pat Brown, you're the best detail man in the business. Thank you very much. I think this is actually a really good topic. There's something to work on for this. So everybody wins in some form or fashion. I'm excited. I'm not going to see you in person between now and the next one, but I am going to see you at least through this internet thing.
I can hardly wait.
Catch you next time, buddy.
All right, pal. Adios.